the military, we frown upon joining organizations like this, or at least we used to. So for 31 years, in accordance with Army tradition and protocol and custom, Army tradition and protocol and custom that is rapidly falling apart, I might add. I didn't involve myself in politics except to go vote. George Marshall didn't even do that. And other organizations that, for one reason or another, might have brought my impartiality into question. Rotary, of course, would not have done that in any significant way. But my dad's association with it for so long taught me that behind the doors, in the latrines, and so forth, lots of politics went on. And so I shied away from it. And ever since I've retired, about the only thing I've done that I didn't do in the 31 years I spent in the military is try to play the stock market. And I don't need to tell you the results of that. They haven't been that good. I was in Jacksonville yesterday after a plane ride from Washington, and after meeting my son in Baltimore Washington International Airport the night before, and his military airlift command is always wont to do, he was 3 hours late, returning from Kirkuk, where he had just completed his second tour. And not only did my wife and I want to greet him and the other soldiers and airmen and Marines getting off the aircraft and clap for them and applaud and call them heroes and so forth, but we also wanted to talk to my son. And we spirited him away to the Holiday Inn and talked to him. And one of the things that is most memorable about that conversation, and we shall have many more, was that he said, in response to one of my inane questions, "Dad, 1/3 of the 3rd Iraqi Air Force is Kurdish, mostly Peshmerga. 1/3 is Sunni, and 1/3 is Shia. And the only thing that united them consistently and vociferously and at the gut level was their hatred for Persia." I said, well, at least we've gotten somewhere. But he found them to be very professional in the performance of their duties. They all speak English, of course, because ICAO requires the pilots speak English. And he found them to be workable with, in the sense that the 3rd Iraqi Air Force is actually performing a meaningful and increasingly good mission. That is to say, they are using the very sophisticated equipment my son introduced them to in their Jordanian-purchased and very old Cessna aircraft to fly at 1,000 feet in the daylight over Iraq and to spot people who are doing things they shouldn't be doing and alert the ground forces so the ground forces can then react, principally now Iraqi forces. And I needn't tell you that on the Iranian-Iraqi border and other such wonderful places, they're finding a lot to report. But increasingly, it's not foreign fighters, it's not weapons and ammunition being smuggled in, it's simply black market activities, which means that the border is returning, somewhat at least, to normal activity. My son also told me that in every village and township in northern Iraq, including Kirkuk, and my son spent a year in Turkey, so I believe him on this, you could identify the Turks, either as intelligence agents or military in mufti, standing on the street corners with their notebooks, taking notes. And he said, if I have to bet, if the Turks come in, I'll put all my money on the Turks. So one of the things that they're working on right now, as you probably know if you've kept up with it, is taking advantage of the fact that the Kurds are the only really prosperous, successful, stable, they aren't Democrats, no way. Very autocratic society, very tribal-dominated society, but at least Sulaymaniyah, for example, and other places look good, beautiful, in fact, and are prosperous and stable, and the Kurds don't want to disturb that. And so, increasingly, the official Kurdish leadership, including that is allied with Maliki in Baghdad, is saying to the PKK, and by implication to the Turks, we better take care of you, because you're going to hurt our stability and our increasing prosperity. Sulaymaniyah, for example, is enjoying a growth rate right now of about 12 to 15% annually. So this may be an opportunity to quell or at least attenuate another developing severe problem that we have in the region with one of our most important allies in the world, the Turks. So this was the good part. I won't tell you about the rest of the things he told me. I'll just launch into what I wanted to say today. And I'm going to dwell on the past only for a moment or two to set the stage. And then I'm going to go and talk about the future, I hope in an optimistic sort of way, but in a candid sort of way. And then if you want to talk about the past and the questions, please feel free to do so. And let me say that Sir Francis Drake's prayer could not have been a better preface to my presentation. So thank you for that serendipity. This is Paris, 12 September 2001. The byline is Jean-Marie Colombani, writing in Le Monde, the world. In this tragic moment, when words seem so inadequate to express the shock people feel, the first thing that comes to mind is this: we are all Americans now. We are all New Yorkers, just as surely as John F. Kennedy declared himself to be a Berliner. Indeed, just as in the gravest moments of our own history, how can we not feel profound solidarity with those people, that country, the United States of America, to whom we are so close and to whom we owe our own freedom? We are all Americans now. Continuing to read from the People's Daily of China. The Iranian people held candle-lit vigils for the victims of the attacks. 1 million marched in Tehran alone. And Tehran Mayor Morteza Alviri and Tehran City Council Chairman Mohammad Atrinfar wrote letters of condolence to New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. How did we go from that moment of profound solidarity, of empathy and sympathy for us as Americans and the tragedy we had undergone on 9/11, to the point now in the world where, regardless of where I go, but particularly in the Middle East, we are reviled, hated, feared, and even our friends and allies are deeply and gravely concerned about the fact we seem to be a headless giant in the world. That is a direct quotation from a former Prime Minister of Canada, a headless giant in the world, who said to me in preface of that, "We couldn't exist if you weren't there. We need you. We yearn for you. We want to travel to your country. We want you to travel to our country. We are so alike, it's hard to tell the difference, but we're really worried about a headless giant in the world." How did we get there? Well, ask me questions, I'll answer them. I'm not going to address how we got there. I'm going to address how we get out of there, I hope. And I'll say this as couched in the form of advice that I'd give to Senator Clinton, Senator Obama, Mayor Giuliani, Governor Romney, or whomever happens to win the presidency in the White House and takes the oath on January the 20th, 2009. First of all, Madam President or Mr. President, you must get our economic house in order. I was on the Hill 3 weeks ago with 30 congressmen. Most of them are Republicans. They were from Texas, California, Michigan, Arkansas, Missouri, and they said to me in a rage, "How did we get here?" And I thought the follow-on questions were going to be all about Iraq. Some of them were, to be truthful. Most of them were about the fiscal profligacy of their party. The fact that we are printing money so fast right now that, as one 87-year-old representative said to me, the only standard we have is how much paper and ink we can buy. $45 trillion of private and corporate debt is a conservative estimate. One economist said to me, you know what coins America as succinctly as possible today in economic terms? DEBT. Madam President, Mr. President, you had better address this from the 20th of January forward. And oh, let me tell you the challenges you're going to confront. We have a working force in America now that is paying for the rest of us who are drawing Social Security and on Medicare and Medicaid, that is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we're growing and growing and growing, and I'm one of we. I could have drawn Social Security 2 years ago. My wife and I talked about it, and I didn't. I don't know what I'm going to do when I reach the age where it's maximum payout, because as an American citizen, I will feel very bad about taking that check, I assure you, because I know what the future holds for my grandchildren. So, Madam President, Mr. President, this is one of your biggest challenges. Second, in terms of foreign policy, you must begin to lead by talking, consulting with, coordinating with, cooperating with where it's in our interest, and generally dealing with our friends and allies around the world as if they were citizens of the world equal to us. I don't give a good you-know-what that we have a $14 trillion GDP and dwarf everybody, except the EU, who had a $16 trillion GDP. Interestingly enough, that bunch of welfare state people over there who can't get their act together. I don't care. I don't care if we're dealing with Havana, Kilimanjaro, or where. They have a right to be heard. The mayor of Beijing said to me on one occasion, former mayor of Beijing, you know, this was right prior to the 2004 election, you know, we ought to have a vote in your election. We ought to. We're 1.3 billion people who feel it every time you sneeze. And I wanted to say, yeah, well, we feel it when you sneeze now too, especially when you're taking our dollars. But we need to be the leader of the free world and the rest of the world too that will follow when and where it's in our interest and their interest. And increasingly, it is in everybody's interest. We will meet none of the awesome challenges that we confront and will continue to confront. Everything from planetary warming to the energy situation that we still have not done very much about, to high seas piracy, to epidemics, pandemics like HIV/AIDS is presenting right now, wiping out whole populations in sub-Saharan Africa. We will confront none of these challenges without cooperation with all of our friends and allies, and at times even possibly our enemies, and that's my next point, Mr. President. You must talk to our enemies. The old Arab proverb of keep your friends close and your enemies closer is apt. You must talk to our enemies. Only when those talks are utterly fruitless and you've exhausted every economic, financial, diplomatic, political tool in your toolbox do you go to the military. And only then when you've thought it out thoroughly from start to finish, not knee-jerk. Your military, Mr. President, is growing weary of being the only instrument in the toolbox you know how or want to use. Increasingly, our foreign policy is militarized. I'll give you one example. To Tokyo, to Berlin, to any capital city in the world, if you ask candidly, what does America represent to you? Or who represents America best or most effectively to you? The answer 9 out of 10 times is the 4-star admiral or general who commands that particular combatant command in that region of the world. And they're growing tired of bearing this burden for this republic. It is expensive. It detracts them from many of the things they should be doing. It keeps them busy with things that other people, like the State Department and others, should be doing, and they don't like it. And I'm telling you that as a 31-year veteran of that department. And though none of them would want to give up the $500 billion plus you give them every year now, they do believe it's quite an imbalance between what they get and the 30-some-odd billion state gets. The Defense Department loses every year the State Department budget in terms of audit procedures and so forth. Last year it was about $35 billion. They couldn't say where it went. Your foreign service has about 6,000 people in it. Your military has about 2.5 million. This is an imbalance we can no longer afford in this rather dangerous and full of challenge world that we're confronting. The next thing I would tell the President to do is simply return to basics. What do I mean by that? Return to that document, for example, that I swore to support and defend. I did not swear to support and defend the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department. I swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and the latter concerns me most today. My Army is up at Carlisle Barracks right now with one of its strategic priorities to plan for martial law. Martial law regionally and martial law across the country. Should a terrorist succeed in exploding a dirty bomb or a nuclear weapon, God forbid, in an American city, that's what they're planning for. That's what they should be doing. But should martial law, violation of posse comitatus and all the tradition and protocol that America stands for, indeed was built on, be the strategic priority of my Army in any sense? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they've been forced into this mime mold by what I will call a creeping tyranny in Washington. It's the same kind of tyranny that Dwight Eisenhower warned about so presciently and so eloquently in his farewell address in 1961. It is not evil. It is not something that is malevolent aforethought. It is the fact that we as Americans have allowed power to develop in this country that can be abused very easily, has very little oversight from that separate and equal branch called the Congress, and one would wonder about that separate and equal today, and also is known very little about by the American people at large. This is power unprecedented. Let me just give you one example. You don't have to go check Lockheed's shares from the point of March to the point now to see that war is profitable. But Lockheed is not about promoting war. It's just latent power. And our founders told us about latent power. If you don't have oversight, if you don't have checks and balances, if you don't have knowledgeable people looking at the use of that power virtually 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's going to be abused. One of the clear notes from the Federalist Papers, from people like Alexander Hamilton, who's always hauled out as the example of executive power, read his Federalist number 6. People like Madison and others, Washington. If you look, you'll see clearly that they understood human nature and the nature of power. It will be abused. Humans will abuse it. So you need to set up checks and balances to watch it. Our checks and balances are out of whack. So return to the Constitution and then also return to the rule of law. You don't need to do a signing statement every time Congress passes something you don't like. You don't need to torture, Madam President, all the facts and figures. Even the Israelis will tell you that torture doesn't work. You don't need to have a vice president, Madam President or Mr. President, who goes over publicly to the Congress of the United States and bends arms to approve torture, and forces Colin Powell to write a letter to John McCain that John McCain copies and puts on every senator's desk so that the vote is about 97-2 when it comes up to get the armed forces, your armed forces, out of the torture business. So return to the rule of law. And also understand that the most effective instrument that you have in your arsenal for fighting whatever terrorists exist in this world, or others for that matter too, who might want to do harm to our interests or to our people, is the very thing that we were founded upon. Our freedom, our governance method, our economy, which after all is the root of our power fundamentally, and all the things that are associated with that. Far more powerful than all the F-16s, F-15s, F-117s, B-2, Nimitz-class carriers, and everything else. Far more powerful. Use those tools in a focused way against the support mechanisms, most importantly, and ultimately against those few terrorists in the world, probably no more than 25 or 30,000, who want to do us harm and might have the capability to do so. Don't wage a global war on terror, Mr. President. That is a foolish characterization of what you're trying to do. For political purposes only is it useful. And the politics of fear has to go along with that in order to make it useful. So let's go after these people. Let's go after them with a vengeance, but let's go after them with the tools that are most effective. First and foremost, the power of our ideas, financial restrictions, economic restrictions, network disruptions, law enforcement, intelligence, and so forth. And lastly, do we go after them with the military? Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib are the greatest incentives for recruiting for Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-like groups in the world today. So you have to stop doing things in the world that cause these people to add to their ranks and cause splinter groups to develop and so forth. And oh, by the way, make sure you're looking at Europe really hard, because all of your European colleagues, if they're candid with you, will tell you that the best, most prolific breeding ground for terrorists today who wish you harm is not in Iraq, it's not in Afghanistan, it's in Europe, in the heart of Europe, where Muslims are enclaved and ghettoed and ready to strike. And guess what is furnishing those Muslims in Europe with a strike force that's battle-hardened and ready to go? Iraq and Afghanistan, and the people who are leaving there and flowing into Europe. That's where the next attack is going to occur, or if it's on us, come from, just as 9/11 did. This is probably one of the most dangerous places in the world in this regard, and we need to work hard every day with our allies and do something about it. Let me tell you something that may startle you. The best ally we have in the war against terrorists, and from the get-go this was true, from 9/12 this was true, is France. And yet we had a Secretary of Defense who insisted on sticking his fingers in the eye of the French every opportunity that he got, and a Secretary of State who had to constantly do damage control and follow up and talk to Dominique de Villepin or Chirac or whomever in order to convince them that, you know, Donald really didn't represent America. This is not the way to do business in the world. Not the way to do business in the world. I have no doubt that there is a high possibility, Mr. President, a high possibility, and if your campaign rhetoric is any indicator, that you're not going to take my advice and you're going to fail even if you do, and you do it half-heartedly. And so as an American, as a citizen, as well as a soldier, I've got some really deep concern about my grandchildren's future. The thing that alleviates my concern, and the reason that I continue to do it, Mr. President, is because I teach at the College of William & Mary and George Washington University, and the young people that I'm teaching are just absolutely top drawer. They're probably the best students I have ever had. And they are in a rage about this situation too, even so much so that they may start voting, which is unprecedented. I had a couple last night jump up and tell me they actually do vote, they're registered, they know the absentee procedures and everything else. This is great. This is terrific. And I do my infinitesimal part to try and enthuse them even more. They've got to start working at places like the CIA, the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, the State Department, the Foreign Service, the Civil Service, and so forth. Because it isn't going to change unless we get good, hard-charging, energetic young people in there who understand the nature of the problem, the nature of the challenges, and most importantly, understand our history and are appreciative of that history to the extent that they want to preserve the best part of it. That's what being a true conservative means, is preserving the best part of what America is. This is not a conservative administration. This is a radical administration. That shocks some people. I said on ABC in Sydney, Australia not too long ago, when a guy asked me if I was going to convert to the Democratic Party, I said, no, I want my party back. I want the Republican Party back. I want the party of Abraham Lincoln back, the party of fiscal responsibility, the party of small government, but government that governs good. I want everything that the Republican Party stood for when my father voted for them back, and I'm prepared to work for it. But I despair of the possibilities given the rhetoric that I'm hearing right now. And I hope that some of your questions will address that, and I hope you will arrest some of my despair. Thank you.